So, you're not going to believe what happened to me back in the summer of '85. I was just a college kid then, spending my vacation in southeast Oklahoma, right in the heart of the Ouachita National Forest. My buddy had this cabin near Broken Bow Lake, perched up on a ridge with a view of Beaver Creek. It's a killer spot, and I've always been the outdoor type, so it was perfect. Anyway, it was July, and Oklahoma storms are no joke. That evening, my friend and his wife had driven into town for some supplies, and they got caught in one of those downpours. It was pitch black by the time they got back, what with the clouds and the new moon and everything. We always cooked outside when we stayed there, over this fire pit halfway down the hill from the cabin. So we did what we always did. We took out the steaks and potatoes, got them on the fire, and just hung out, waiting for them to cook. Now you know how campsites are about bears. They had those bear-proof trash cans all over, the kind with the latches that you need opposable thumbs to open. They put up those signs everywhere, telling you not to keep food in your tent. But we weren't worried. We didn't have a tent, and we were up off the ground in the cabin, so we just kept our food inside in coolers. So we're there, cooking, when I see these eyes, these yellow eyes just watching us from the tree line. Couldn't have been more than 20 feet away. I nudged my friend, and I'm like, "Hey, we got company." We figured it was a bear, attracted by the smell of the steaks or something. The forest was dense, and with the storms having just finished. It was wet. Everything was dripping wet. And with no moon, it was dark. I mean, except for when a few fleeting lightning strikes would flash, you couldn't see anything beyond the firelight. And we're keeping an eye out because we don't want a surprise bear visit. But then, the eyes just disappeared. Maybe it was the smoke from the steaks or something that spooked whatever it was. After dinner, we cleaned up, buried the leftovers by the creek, and called it a night. At least in terms of being outside, and we head inside to relax and get dry. But here's where it gets weird. We're inside, playing cards, and we hear this noise outside. It's this weird, high-pitched sound, almost like a wail. My buddy and I look at each other like, what the heck is that? We grab a flashlight and head outside, thinking maybe it's a mountain lion or something. We get down to the fire pit, and that's when we see it. It's not a bear. It's big, yeah, but it's standing on two legs, covered in fur, and it's got these eyes, those same yellow eyes I saw earlier. My heart's pounding like crazy, and I can't move. I'm just staring at this Bigfoot, I guess. It had to be, right? It just stands there, looking at us, and then it lets out that sound again, that wail, and it sends chills down my spine. Then, as quick as it appeared, it turns and disappears into the forest, just like that, gone. So there we were, just staring into the thick woods where this creature had just vanished. My buddy looks at me, eyes wide, and I can tell he's thinking the same thing I am. "Are we really going to do this?" I ask, and without a word, we're grabbing our flashlights and heading into the trees. The forest feels different at night, especially after you've just seen something that's supposed to be a legend. Every sound is amplified, and our lights hardly make a dent in the darkness. We start seeing shadows everywhere, but we push on. The ground's still wet from the storms, making it easy to track the footprints. They're huge, like nothing I've ever seen, leading deeper into the forest. We must have been following those prints for a good 20 minutes when we hear it again, that wail echoing between the trees. It's close, and this time it's followed by a crashing sound. We freeze. "Do we really want to find out what's making that noise?" my friend whispers. I nod because if we don't find out now, we'll always wonder. We move toward the sound, and that's when we see it again, in a small clearing. It's turned away from us, doing something at the base of a tree. We're close enough now to hear it. It's like it's talking to itself in this low, grumbling voice that doesn't sound like any language I've heard before. Then it stops and goes silent. It must have heard us because it stands up straight, taller than any man I've ever seen, and slowly turns around. I swear it looks right at us. There's this moment where nobody moves, not us, not it. Then it lifts one massive hand and sort of gestures like it wants us to come closer. Now, I'm not the bravest guy, but there's something about its movements that don't feel threatening. It's more like it's curious. My buddy's gripping my arm, ready to run, but I take a step forward instead. I don't know why I do it. I just feel like I have to. It doesn't move as I approach, just watches me. I stop a few feet away, close enough to see that its eyes aren't just yellow. They're like gold, shining in the light from my flashlight. And they're intelligent, man, like it understands. Then it turns again and walks to the tree where it was standing before. It points at the base, and that's when I see it, a small hollow, inside of which are a bunch of objects, rocks, feathers, stuff like that, all arranged in a circle. It's like a shrine or something. I look back at the creature, and it makes this soft noise, a kind of hum. Then it backs away, giving us space. My buddy finally steps forward, and we both look at the collection. It's weird, like it means something, but I can't figure out what. We don't touch anything. It feels wrong, like we'd be messing with something important. We just look at each other and back at the creature, which is still watching us. After a moment, it turns and walks away, disappearing into the forest. We don't try to follow it this time. We just stand there, looking at the hollow, trying to process what just happened. Eventually, we head back to the cabin. The image of those gold eyes burned into my mind. We don't talk much on the way back. What's there to say? We pack up the next day and leave, a little earlier than we'd planned. Hey Lilith, I hope you are doing well. I wanted to share something with you that happened to me and my family last summer. It's just me and my mom and dad, and we went on vacation in California for about 2 weeks. And one of the places we visited was Yosemite National Park. Now that's a big leap for us since we're not the outdoorsy type. Dad was all hyped about getting in touch with nature, and surprisingly, Mom was on board too. She's usually more about comfort than adventure, but this time she was game. And me? I was just excited to break away from the usual stuff. It is a really beautiful place, with mountains, waterfalls, meadows, and giant trees. The first day there, we decided to go on an easy hike called Bridal Veil Falls. We parked our car at the parking lot by the trailhead and began walking up the path towards the falls. It was pretty crowded as it was summertime, but everyone seemed to be enjoying themselves despite the crowd. As we were making our way up, my dad even pointed out some climbers scaling El Capitan, which is one of those iconic cliffs at Yosemite known for its difficulty. That was cool to see. We finally made it to Bridal Veil Falls after about 20 minutes or so of hiking through rocky terrain lined with tall pine trees. The waterfall itself was magnificent. Water cascaded down from above into a small pool below, creating a mist that covered everything around us. Everyone who had hiked up here seemed to be taking pictures, including ourselves. I took out my phone and snapped away like everybody else, trying to capture this natural beauty. As I finished taking pictures, I looked around again, only now realizing how quiet it had gotten. There weren't any tourists near me talking or even whispering anymore. They had all gathered in one spot and were all looking at something further down. My curiosity got the better of me, so I walked over there too. There, a ranger stood next to a couple sitting on bench seats, holding their heads in their hands and looking really distraught. It turns out they lost their son while hiking just hours ago. I heard them talking about how he'd gone off trail, exploring somewhere. He didn't return when his parents expected him to. They tried calling him several times, but he didn't come back. Also, he wasn't answering his phone. Soon enough, other rangers arrived along with additional park staff members. People even formed impromptu search parties and went off in different directions, looking for the missing boy. I remember feeling a sense of unease come over me. This place, which had seemed so beautiful just moments ago, suddenly had a different vibe. We stayed there for about an hour, helping to look around a bit, but eventually left the area when visitors were asked to do so. It was a somber drive back to our hotel. I couldn't stop thinking about what happened or how easily one could get lost here, especially if they didn't know their way around. The next day, we visited another part of Yosemite called Glacier Point, which offers stunning views of the valley below, including Half Dome. As we drove up towards Glacier Point, I noticed several signs along the road warning visitors not to feed wildlife like bears, raccoons, etc. Bear sightings were common here, according to those signs. We parked our car in a lot near the point and got out. I took a couple selfies with us all standing against the backdrop of the valley, then walked a bit further where the railing overlooked Rest Park. From here, you could see Vernal Nevada Falls, even though they appeared tiny compared to everything else around them. Then something really strange caught my eye. It was a figure, but not like any animal I'd seen, even in all the nature documentaries I'd watched before the trip. This thing was huge, easily the biggest creature I could imagine, and it was standing on 2 legs. I rubbed my eyes, thinking the sun was playing tricks on me, but when I looked again, it was still there. It was covered in thick, dark fur and seemed to be, well, almost peering back at us from across the landscape. I turned to grab my dad, who was always into those cryptozoology shows, and pointed. He squinted for a moment, and then his eyes widened. "No way," he whispered. That looks like a Sasquatch." The crowd around us must have caught on to our excitement because a small group started gathering, pointing and murmuring in disbelief. Mom, ever the skeptic, just shook her head and joked about it being the lost hiker. But deep down, I think even she knew this was different. I mean, this thing was covered in fur. People started pulling out binoculars and cameras, trying to get a better look. I overheard someone saying that they had captured a blurry photo, which was probably going to end up on some forum online, fueling endless debates. But as we watched, the figure turned and walked into the trees, disappearing from view. Just like that, it was gone. The air was buzzing with questions and theories, but none of that buzz could drown out the sound that came next. It was a call, distant and faint, but unmistakable, a voice, and it was yelling, "Help!" Instinctively, the crowd grew silent, and in that silence, the voice called out again. This time, it was clearer. It was the missing hiker's voice. Without a word, several of us, my dad included, started in the direction of the voice. We were a makeshift search party moving together, driven by the same hope. It didn't take long before we found him, a kid maybe 20 years old, his clothes a bit torn and his face smeared with dirt. But he was standing and very much unharmed. He was shaky, scared, but unharmed. He told us he had been wandering, trying to get a better view of the valley when he slipped off the trail. He'd been stuck on a ledge for hours, too afraid to move up or down. And then he saw it, the Sasquatch. He said it was big and scary at first, but it didn't hurt him. It just looked at him, almost curiously, then walked away. It was after it left that he could hear all of us talking loudly, and he gathered the courage to call out to us for help. The rangers arrived soon after, and needless to say, everyone was relieved. They took him back to his parents while the rest of us were left to process what we had just experienced. Was it possible that the Sasquatch we saw was the same creature the boy had encountered? Did we even really see what we think we saw? The story spread like wildfire. By the time we were ready to leave Yosemite, everyone was talking about the hiker who had been lost and found. And our family, well, we felt like we were part of something extraordinary. We witnessed something incredible. This experience, this trip, it changed us. We came to Yosemite as tourists, but we left with a tale of adventure, a brush with the unknown that we will carry with us forever. Trucking was my ticket to freedom to escape my small town. Over the years of driving, I got used to the solitude, the quick friendships with folks at truck stops, and the calls home that got less frequent. Luckily, I wasn't married or anything because I've seen guys really struggle with that. The cab of my truck became my second home, maybe even my first. Yeah, I've missed weddings, birthdays, even funerals, but in return, I've seen corners of the country most people only see on postcards. It's not a life for everyone, but for me, it works. So I was making my way through the pine barrens, right? I'm on this stretch of road that feels like it's been left behind by everything else. Just me and my rig cutting through the night. This route, it's something else, especially at night, when it's just you and the road. I wasn't expecting much, just another drive from Atlantic City to Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. Most times, it's just about getting from point A to B without much fuss. No time to stop and smell the roses, not that there are many out there in the woods. But that night, with just my lukewarm coffee and a sandwich to keep me company, I felt something was different. The road, with those tall pines on either side, has a way of making you feel small, you know? And the silence, it can be heavy. Sometimes the moon would break through the trees and light up a patch of the road. I was listening to Johnny Cash, just cruising along, nothing to worry about. But then, halfway through my route, things started to get super weird. The more I drove, the more I felt this nagging feeling that something wasn't right. Out of the corner of my eye, I kept seeing something moving, darting around just out of the reach of my headlights. I tried to tell myself it was just a deer or something, but it just didn't feel right. And then there was the smell. It hit me out of nowhere. This strong, bitter odor that filled up the cab like a fog. I tried to shake it off, but it clung to the inside of the truck, thick and suffocating. Rolling down the windows only seemed to make it cling more desperately. I'll be honest, I started to feel real nervous. I've seen a lot on the road, but this night I was sweating it a bit. The air got heavy, my shirt stuck to my back, and my pulse, it was racing. Then, as if things weren't bad enough, my radio just quit on me. 1 second I'm listening to Folsom Prison Blues, and the next, it's just static filling the cab. I reached for the dial, trying to find another station, anything to break that creepy silence. But no luck, just more of that hissing static, like the radio was trying to tune into something that wasn't there. That's where it gets really bizarre. I'm trying to keep my cool, telling myself there's got to be a logical explanation for all this, right? But out here, alone in the Pine Barrens, logic seemed to take a back seat. The road kept on stretching, the pines seemed to close in, and that feeling that something was very wrong just wouldn't let go of me. It's funny, in the light of day, everything has an explanation, but out there, in the dark, with the shadows and the sounds, your mind starts to wander. You start to think about all the stories you've heard, and you tell yourself it's just a road, just a night like any other. But deep down, you can't shake the feeling that maybe you're not alone out there after all. And then, it happened. A screech from outside the rig cut right through that static on the radio. Out of the corner of my eye, just a blur in the shadows, I caught a glimpse in the mirror. All of a sudden, this dark shape swooped down from the sky, straight at me. I couldn't tell where it came from. It was like it just appeared out of thin air. I hit the brakes hard, the truck skidding on the gravel, and there, lit up in the headlights, this creature was staring right at me. It was one of those moments where everything just stops. My heart was pounding so loud I could barely hear anything else. And this thing in front of me, it was like a shadow that had just stepped out of some dark corner of the world. It had these wide, bat-like wings that just flapped and then went still. It looked almost human, but it was all wrong. Skin stretched over its body, shining like it was wet. Its face was something out of a horror film, too long, too twisted, with these small, glowing eyes that just didn't seem real. It had this mouth, all teeth and tongue and these twisted horns. Right then, I knew. It had to be the Jersey Devil. I mean, I'd heard the stories. We all did. I was frozen, waiting for something to happen, for it to just explode into action. But it just hovered there, and then it screamed again. That sound was like nothing I've ever heard before. And then, as if I had made it all up, it was gone, disappearing back into the night. I just sat there, hands gripping the wheel, worried that I had wet myself, which I didn't, by the way, which it's important to me that you know that. Anyway, I eventually managed to get the truck moving again, but the rest of that drive was rough. I couldn't stop seeing that face, couldn't get that scream out of my head. When I finished the haul, I still couldn't let it go. I spent nights looking up every story, every bit of lore I could find online. It felt like I had to prove to myself that it wasn't just in my head. And a part of me, it felt vindicated, like I'd seen something most people would never believe. But it changes you, seeing something like that. You think you're tough, and then you're not. Every time I'm on the road at night now, I can't help but remember those eyes, that scream. Seeing the Jersey Devil, it changed the way travel, nights on the road. I'm more alert now and don't get caught up in music and stuff. And despite everything, despite the fear, there's this strange feeling of wonder, because out there somewhere is something that's beyond what we call normal, something truly extraordinary. All right, let me tell you about this one time I decided to check out this old mine in Leadville, Colorado. It was fall 2011, I remember, because the air was starting to get that chill, and the leaves were all sorts of crazy colors. So I had heard some wild stories about this place. You know, the usual stuff that gets you interested. People seeing things, weird noises, the whole shebang. And I thought, why not? I had some time, and it seemed like the perfect spot for a little trip. I got there late afternoon. The sky was overcast, like it couldn't decide if it wanted to rain or not, and the mine was just there, staring at me. It looked like a scene from an old horror flick, with these beat-up buildings clustered around like they were trying to keep each other from falling apart. I figured I was prepared, had my flashlight, my rope, though what I was going to do with a rope, I had no clue, but it seemed like the right thing to bring. Standing at the entrance, I felt like I was about to step into the mouth of the beast. The air was stale, and I swear it was like the ground was rumbling. Walking in was like stepping back in time. It was just me and the dark, and the walls were all wet and shiny. It was the kind of quiet that's so thick you can almost feel it. But then, out of nowhere, this clicking sound cuts through, quick and sharp. It stopped me dead in my tracks. For a second, I thought about turning back. That noise was just wrong. But hey, I was already there. Might as well see it through, right? So I kept moving. I'm telling myself it's just some animal. Except this clicking seemed very purposeful, which was unsettling. The deeper I went, the more that silence felt like it was weighing on me, pressing down until every little noise seemed to explode in the air. And that clicking came back, closer than before, like some sort of messed up metronome. Then for just a second, my light hit something pale and wrong. It looked like a person, but not really. It was all twisted up, skin too shiny and limbs too long, and it moved in this jerky, twitchy way that just like nothing you ever want to see. This thing, as my mind labeled it for lack of a better term, was part of the mine's legend, one which I hadn't heard at that point. It paused, and its head snapped up, empty eye sockets somehow finding me in the darkness. My breath hitched, and every instinct told me this was wrong, that such things couldn't exist. But here it was, defying logic, a creature that time forgot or chose to ignore. It didn't make a sound now, but the absence of that clicking was almost worse, like a silent judgment from this entity. It was hard to tell if it was curious or threatening, its body language as alien as its form. The standoff felt eternal, my mind racing through every possible outcome of this encounter. I remember thinking, this is it. This is how I become one of those stories, a cautionary tale of the stupid adventurer who went looking for the dark and found more than he bargained for. But the creature didn't advance. It just watched me, and I swear I could feel its gaze, feel it sizing me up. Was I prey? An intruder? Its head tilted as it looked me over, and I felt a shiver that had nothing to do with the cold. I had a choice then. I could have run, tried to make it back to the entrance, back to the world of light and reason, or I could stand my ground, face this fear head on. Maybe it was foolishness, maybe bravery, or maybe the two are one and the same when you're underground with a creature from hell. So I stayed. I watched the crawler as it watched me, each of us trying to puzzle out the other. Time seemed to warp, stretch, snap back, and then, as if it had come to some sort of decision, the crawler moved. Not towards me, but to the side, slowly, its movements deliberate. I realized it was giving me passage, allowing me to move deeper into the mine. Why? I didn't know, but the path was clear, and my feet started moving before I could second-guess myself. As I passed the spot where the crawler had been, the air grew colder, if possible. The weight of the earth above felt heavier. I walked on, leaving the creature behind me in the shadows. I don't know why it let me go, why it didn't just come at me with those gnarled claws. Maybe it was the same curiosity that had brought me here, a desire to understand the unknown. I kept walking, each step an internal conversation between my fear and the will to see more. I didn't look back. I couldn't. The further I got from where the creature stood, the more the oppressive silence of the mine began to fill with the sounds of my own movement. I eventually reached what looked like the heart of the mine, an open cavern that housed pieces of machinery long abandoned and covered in dust. That's when I decided it was enough. I'd seen what I came to see, felt what I came to feel, and pushed my luck as far as it would stretch. The way back seemed longer than I remembered, but with each step, the light at the end of the tunnel grew brighter, and there was now more signs of the creature. Finally, I stepped out into the late afternoon light, the chill air a welcome slap to my face. I turned back to look at the mine entrance one last time. Nothing moved in the darkness inside, yet at the same time, everything for me had changed. I got in my car without another glance, the engine roaring to life as I drove away quickly, leaving the mine and wondering why in the world I had ever chosen to do what I just did. I work as a park ranger in a national park where I have served for 10 years. My duties involve patrolling the park, ensuring that visitors adhere to the rules, and being vigilant for any suspicious activity or potential dangers. Throughout my tenure, I've encountered a variety of peculiar occurrences, ranging from atypical animal behaviors to inexplicable sounds emanating from the woods. However, there is one incident that stands out as the most memorable. Approximately 5 years ago, during the busy summer season, the park was bustling with tourists and campers. On what started as an ordinary day, I was conducting my usual rounds, checking in on the campground, assuring the well-being of hikers, and verifying the smooth operation of the park. After attending to a remote campsite, I took a moment to rest on a nearby log alongside one of our trails. As I sat there for about 10 minutes, my attention was suddenly drawn to a figure moving through the trees opposite me. Initially, I suspected it might be a camper or even an animal. However, upon closer inspection, I realized it was neither. What approached was a man dressed entirely in black, concealing his face with a mask. He advanced silently and with haste. As the figure drew nearer, I noticed a large backpack strapped to his back. Without warning, he halted about 20 feet from my location, turned around, and bending over, he opened his backpack. To my astonishment, he extracted 2 large antlers and placed them atop his head. Now standing erect and holding the antlers, the sight before me was nothing short of surreal. The man's stark black attire, the stately antlers jutting toward the sky, and the unsettling silence created a haunting tableau. Frozen in fear and bewilderment, I was unable to comprehend the man's intentions or his reason for being there. My attempts to vocally confront him failed as words seemed to escape me, leaving me mute in his presence. After a tense standstill, he spun around and vanished into the woods, leaving me in a state of shock. It took several minutes to regain my composure before I hurriedly retreated to my truck. The vision of the man in black with his antlers has haunted me since then. To this day, his identity and purpose remain enigmatic. The sight of him is an image I doubt I will ever shake off, and the mere thought still sends shivers down my spine. I'm left to ponder the secrets these woods might hold, hidden from the eyes of the unsuspecting. Later, I learned from a colleague that he too had encountered the eerie antlered man. This encounter had occurred a few years prior to mine, as he patrolled another region of the park. Much like in my own experience, the man materialized without warning, remaining silent yet seemingly intent on conveying an ominous message through his mere presence. After several minutes, he retreated back into the forest, just as mysteriously as he had appeared. Like me, my fellow ranger was left without any further sightings or explanations. I often wonder if there are others who have encountered this mysterious figure, rangers or visitors who may have kept their experiences to themselves, driven by fear or perplexity. As rangers, we are equipped to manage a spectrum of challenges, from the fury of nature to the chaos of unruly visitors. Yet it's encounters such as these that render us feeling exposed and uneasy. Our mission is to safeguard the flora, fauna, and human guests of our parks, but it is moments like these that serve as stark reminders of the vast unknown lurking within the wilderness. The enigma persists. Who is this strange man adorned in black? What drives him to meander through our national park with towering deer antlers? And why does he reveal himself solely to the few who inadvertently or fatefully cross his path? Perhaps in time we will uncover these answers. For now, the mystery goes unsolved,